Hello, Lisa Starr. It's really great to see you again here on our monthly Lunar Insights.
Same.
Uh, yes, and this month we'll be reflecting upon the self existing moon of definition. And just to remind our audience, or for the first time listeners, Lisa Starr, you've been for 26 years now journeying with the 13 moon calendar and the dream spell calendar on your personal journey, and also been giving it as a teaching to your surroundings and your environment in many different ways. You wrote books, you have your podcast Natural Time on Spotify, which I got to know you through. And for me, it's a real pleasure every time to be meeting you, because I learn a lot just from talking to you. You're like one of my wise elders. So I really
Mm.
thank you for flowing with me on this 13 moon flow that we've decided to go upon together. How are you today?
I am content, but it is very early in my day, so we shall see. But nothing has gone wrong in the first half hour of dawn where I am.
Yeah, yeah, great. So we're conversing from opposite sides of the
That-
planet.
That's
You're in the
true.
West, and I'm more in the Mid East. And
Yes, so
so,
the listener can notice I'm in my early morning and Alan is closer to dusk. So we
yeah,
we have polarity represented on all these different levels.
yeah, yeah, in many different levels, masculine, feminine, time of day. So it's great.
Age range, all
Age
up to
range,
being the
yeah, yeah,
elder. I was the youngster when I started, so the 26-year gap means that I've made it to elder status, but I was once the young pup.
yeah. And I've made half the journey of you've made. I'm 13 years in now with the Mayan wisdom in my life. So I'm curious to discover where I'll be when I complete my 26 years, and it'll be around the age of 52.
Wow.
Yeah, so very synchronized, very orderly journey for the white mirror that I am. Yes. So we've approached the self-existing moon, which is an interesting time in a journey of development for any form of energy, definitely for humans, because if until now we were kind of just starting the movement of the 13 moons, the wave of the 13 moons, and on the electric moon we kind of got our activation and started realizing that there's some new energy that's pushing us to a new direction of development. and and then we come and we face this time of definition, which is kind of like, for my experience, kind of telling us, okay, being electrified is great, but it doesn't create things in this three-dimensional physical reality and in other realities as well. So there is a real need to define what it is we're aiming for, what it is we're directing our energy towards. So I'd love to hear from you. What is your how do you understand the self-existing tone, the self-existing moon? What is this kind of development phase in your from your understanding?
Well, I'm glad we have like an hour to go through it because I'll have all these different threads that will pop up. But when I'm listening to you, the first thing that comes to mind is just that speaking about maybe the human species, like we can have consciousness and awakening, but we really are designed to do something productive and, like you said, like physical or planetary with it. I think if we were just ether spirits, then we wouldn't have the same directive. So the process of the 13 moons or any 13-day wave spell or a 13-year wave spell, in the beginning, it feels more nebulous. And this is the moment, like one of the most stark moments where it isn't nebulous. We're being directed to be concrete and have a plan, and the plan is forming in our lives in this moment. But it's a little hard to speak about philosophically or spiritually because it's so directed to detail and creating a foundation that we can grow from, but it's about the foundation. It isn't about like, oh, divinity is inspiring me. That's sort of what we just had in the electric moon. And now we're going to just be, I think it feels more robotic or, like I said, less spiritual, but it's such an important part of the larger spiritual journey. So,
Yeah, I really can connect to that. And it's also resonating for me this very important understanding that I had quite early in my spiritual awakening journey, that holding the ideas of higher consciousness and higher values is really great, but it doesn't make reality shift into anything. I mean, you can vibrate ideas on an energetic level, but then what do you do with all this human life? You just live a human life based on what other people do. So there's this very important phase that we are asked to go through when awakening to divinity is okay. So now I need to understand how I'm going to bring to real life these great understandings that I have. And like you said, it could seem a bit robotic from one coming from a pure spiritual perspective, but one coming from a pure human perspective, being only full of good ideas but not acting upon them, is even not even robotic. It can be observed as a bit disconnected, or even in my mind it came the word ridiculous. Like why would you put so much energy in having ideas if you're not going to do anything about them?
right, or ignoring that we're sort of vessels for spirit to fill, and then if we're not going to let that flow outward in service to others, then we're overstuffed in a different way. I came up through what we used to have like the New Age movement, and I think the internet culture really disseminated the focus on certain New Age teachers or trends because we can all explore these more niche personal ways of being guided into occult or mystical wisdom. But there would be so much uniformity of sort of selfishness and what can I get for myself from spiritual principles, abundance, and, I'm going to be eternally happy. And I think that this calendar is organized around being of service, being aware, not just willing, but aware that we're here to receive something giant from the universe and then transport it through our bodies to others. And the others don't even have to be humans, it can not just animals, but like we're going to be in service maybe to principles or development of ideas that create industry that is somehow a gift to the planet. I mean, we don't specify that's what this moon is for, is like what form of, can I use my electric moon's summoning of service through my being? How can I be helpful?
Yeah,
So I prefer this evolution where we get not just one moon with the word service in it, but two. And I think that's an important point, is that it's so amplified that we want to remember that we start our wave spells kind of like stuck in ego, like my purpose, my challenge, and then it breaks through that we're going to be given help as we work through our purpose and challenge, and then we're going to somehow give that away to others.
yeah, yeah. So as I listen to you, I'm wondering, for a person that doesn't practice this calendar or is new to it, what would it mean to define a service? Because it could, if we take it to the most material way of looking at things, so of course there's a service of, I don't know, storing money. We call it a bank because it's like something that's solid and you can't just break into. It's like it's a bunker, kind of. It's a bank of things. So a bank is a definition for a place that keeps money. But if we're talking about services that are more connected or coming from a more spiritual perspective, like healing, so suddenly there comes a need to say, okay, so healing is a definition of a form of that can be even going deeper into what is healing or what is service. So how do you see this process of defining something? Like, what does it take to define, for example, like spiritual service? What is this process of service,
I
of
love your
definition?
example, though. I love your example so much. And it is, I was just thinking, like, what if we didn't have banks? It would be so nerve-wracking. It's such a huge service that I can keep my X thousands of dollars somewhere where someone won't steal it or it won't burn. And I like, what an amazing service. And of course, we probably don't stop and offer our gratitude to the corporate bureaucracies in our life. But they are helpful. And that's a perfect example of how the self-existing moon could be a moment when someone realizes they need to be a banker, but I think they won't be listening to our channel and they won't be following the calendars that we follow. And that's the joke. That's the subtle joke, is that people that are drawn to learning about Mayan mysticism and natural time probably have to do something that is more obviously spiritually suited or magically awake, alive to, all the levels. I'm not saying bankers don't have that, but perhaps they don't. Their minds are being best served by, something much more tactile and immediate. So here we are together somehow listening and learning about the calendar. And I think the way to find out how you can best be of service and follow the sort of the instruction of the question that Jose Arguelles posed for us is to just watch, and that passive student role in life when dealing with a calendar is both really helpful and maybe required, but more so it's a huge gift. So you don't start the new self-existing moon going, oh my God, what is my form of service? I have to figure this out. Instead, you are just reminded that the question lives in this time, and then you just look because you'll be shown, right?
Mm.
That is, to me, almost, I mean, I'm sure I said this a bunch of times. That's the most important part of this calendar, but this facet is just that you get your answer by living your life. And so you're directed to be present with what is. We don't talk about the Zolkin 260-day calendar and the tribes and tones, the 13-day wave spells we move through on this, program together, because it's going to change. Every 13 moon year has a different set of tribes that we move through, but you can get your answer by mixing the 13 moon calendar with the Zolkin and looking around and seeing what's going on with the wave spells of 13 days that happen within the moons we enjoy. But you can also just look at your life without those specific labels, and within the first 7 days of a moon, I think you'll get an answer, and then it'll get refined and it'll also be tested and, put through the alchemy of high pressurized, demand on you, and then it'll crystallize by the end. But within the first 7 days, I bet you can see what form of service you're meant to take.
Yeah, yeah, I like that. And it is very important to mention, like you do, that the 13 moon calendar goes along in the same kind of motion as we observe it with the Tzolkin, with the dream spell calendar that gives us the inside work of the how the month is played out. So each cycle of 13 moons we get to experience through a different layout of the wave spells, and so it's a reflection of how evolution is cyclical, but it's also all the time renewing itself in a way that we can't predict, and that's what makes it magical, because it keeps reappearing in a similar way but in a brand new form all the time. And this realization can only be realized through observation. And this calendar really enables us to observe our lives and our reality in a way that shows us and reflects to us this synchronic order. And it's very incredible. And as we both know, we're acting out of pure service to enable this perspective to as many people as we can in our humble ways. And so there's a lot of, I find, in the in the self-existing tone, it's where words start to become very important as a means of transporting energy. because definition eventually is a form of linguistic. So I can define something in my native language, and then when I want to define it in another language, I will have to use a completely different, usually completely different vibration
Mm.
and different vessel to bring forward a similar idea in another, to be defined in another way. And I find this really incredible because the self-existing tone, in one way, it's kind of a simple idea. If you want something to exist, you need to call it by its name. Because if I don't tell you we'll meet through, a certain vessel like a computer and a software and a program, then it's like the possibility doesn't exist. So it's actually, I love looking into these fine details of how reality is being created as a white mirror. I think it's like the fine details, they where most people don't look. This is where I find like the juicy stuff, because that's where I really meet, I call it God. That's where I really meet God, in the fine details of like, why does this word bring this energy, and who created, how did you make it so, the language is able to make energy flow in a way that it makes things be created. And so just to define definition, we need to use a lot of words.
True. Well, that's why I think it's kind of the self-existing tone matches pretty innately with what the human instinctual behavior is. And, I have some dogs and they have to, in the self-existing moon, they're probably operating more like humans than in the rest of the moons. They're just times when we are connecting the spiritual walk of the calendar and the behaviors it invites with things that humans are really dexterous at. So that's like how I would picture that. I just want to point out to anyone listening that Alone is speaking English second language, which is so stupendous to me because the only language I speak secondhand is Swedish. And whenever I speak Swedish, I feel like I'm about 7 years old because of my language capability. But you are so skilled at speaking English. So I think that's a good example of human dexterity and the awe of what humans will do to with the details. How intricate and almost overwrought this planet is because of human ingenuity. Just the tiniest things that we make or the most, grandiose things that we make. And I just think that you can think about the self-existing moon a little bit in that framework of ingenuity and always wanting to sort of clinically measure, define, form. Those are the words: define, measure, and form. And all of those words just feel very thinky. I'd like to share what I when I teach the calendar. I get really primitive. It's a little feels a little like I'm appropriating ancient Maya, but I also used to teach school, and so I like examples that make you feel like you are time traveling back into a different way and that children understand. So I like to think of the self-existing moon being a measure of four, 4 dots. If you look at the Mayan hieroglyphic numeric system, it's 4 dots. And those 4 dots to me could be the corners of a square. So just a tiny bit of not necessarily sacred geometry, but regular geometry. The magnetic 1 dot is just that 1 dot, and then 2 dots for the second lunar tone is like connecting a line. And then you get the 3 dots for the electric tone, and that's like a triangle. And then we switch it to a square for the 4 dots. And that to me is kind of, it's like I start with self and then I realize there's always another. And then I realize there's this point taking me, divinity fills me and other and my challenges. And then the self-existing moment with the 4 is different. And it's the base of the Mayan pyramid to me. That square is both a plan for how we're going to start building something that ends up looking like a triangle that takes us to the sky, to the heavens, but we have a square at the base. It's kind of an optical illusion, and that the self-existing moment is for us in our lives spiritually, yes, ground our spirituality in something that connects to the planet where we can walk and grow from something solid, but also is just, again, like they used to call people who were like working regular jobs squares in, during the hippie movement. And so I just think it's sort of like the square represents the boxed in functionality of human existence, but it has an important component in the walk through 13 tones or a wave spell. We have to have a moment when we're boxed in and we appreciate it. We appreciate containers and forms and boundaries and specificity of purpose rather than, I don't know, I just love it and I'll do whatever. Because I can't stand that. I can't stand as a spiritualist when people can't get grounded and find a way to solidify, like you said, the ideas streaming through them, and whether it's an ayahuasca ceremony or deep meditation, like, okay, great, you found God or the universe is infinite, but we are finite in our incarnation. And this tone matches that realization. And if you miss the self-existing defined form and measure, you float off through your life. It can be really uncomfortable for yourself and others to never get that grounded intention or awakening that there's something I must do concretely.
Yep, yep,
That was
yep,
like a rant.
definitely, definitely. Yeah, it's a good rant. It brings forward makes clear the idea that we're talking about. And, self-existing people that come to me for map readings are just self-existing people that I meet in my life. I've noticed from the very beginning that they're people that are all the time busy with defining things, like realizing what is the truest form of this thing that we're speaking about, like taking it from air and turning it into earth. All the time they're doing this movement of taking something to talk about, and they're busy. I can see their minds all the time working to try to make it something graspable. And I actually, these are the kind of people that I go to when I need to ground ideas. Like, really practically, if it's a self existing storm, when I need to grasp and ground kind of processes I'm going through that I'm not able to all the way understand. So by their presence, I can kind of flow it through them, and they're with me in the whole movement, and then they help me to put it into definitions. And if it's a self-existing Skywalker that's been helping me continuously over the years, whenever I want to do to make concrete business ideas I have, to bring them into physical form. And whether it's the self-existing dog that kind of teaches me of having barriers around the heart as a positive way of being open to love, not as like I'm closing my heart, but as like in a humble way. This is what I'm capable of within. These are my heart's capabilities, and it's amazing how I see it every time through and again. It's really working. Self-existing seed was my first business consultant, a woman, my first ever, when I started giving the Mayan wisdom that comes through me as a service. The first woman that realized I have this gift and told me you need to do it, she was a self-existing seed. So she's like sprouted the idea, birthing the initiality of the idea through defining it in a very initial way. So I find the self-existing people, they're very, very, they're doing their job very well. They can't help it. And for me, as you also said before, it's almost like our minds, they're wired in the frequency of the self-existing tone. Like what our minds are busy doing is all the time defining this energy in this space we're in into concepts that we can grasp as humans, so we can continue from step to step living on a planet where we understand in some way what's happening.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, again, I'm remembering just like how it is if you go to a really amazing retreat, or I mean, other people might do plant spirit medicine journeys, and you just really do crack open straight to divine consciousness, and you can just feel it, the endlessness of it, the freedom there. But that is just a stage, and I could equal it to like the electric tone, and then we have to come back into our bodies, and our bodies have physical functions that are instinctual and survivalistic, and beyond that we have societies, etc. So that's kind of the prism I would put the self-existing tone in, is just the reminder of reality. We only stay here for one of 13 stages. So if it sounds like, oh my God, this is exactly what I'm trying to get through or beyond when I study Mayan spirituality or mysticism. What do you, well, it's just one of the 13. We go through it for 28 days like all the rest, but it's in balance. It's just one of 13 where we get really measured, and our, like, I think that's a perfect example. Our brains, especially in an internet age where we're taking in so much information, we're like high speed processors now versus like, oh, the moon is waxing and waning, or the sky is, the stars are turning, annually. Instead, it's just like one image and idea and soundbite after another. And so yeah, this particular tone is just very attuned to how the development of our human brains. And so I think it can feel brainiac and like, what about the rest of my body? And it's just, I mean, it's kind of lucky to, it's like a vacation to just to be in sync with the human mind for 28 days, and it's not going to be as much of a tug of war as introducing other concepts.
Yeah,
So I'm kind of excited about it now. I think we've cracked open things I haven't thought about in a long time. I will share that I have two children. I am a blue overtone storm, and I have an overtone daughter, my first, and then I have a self-existing seed daughter. And after being overtone, having an overtone child, and then she was like an alien, and it wasn't even that big of a tonal shift just by one tone, but she sort of is obviously the preamble. Overtone is 5 and she's 4, but she is so much more practical than we are, and so much more demanding of things being ordered. It was like introducing a parent into a household of
mm.
monkeys. And so I am gratified by how we're talking about this together, because it just really reminds me of how she wants containers and borders and boundaries and identification of roles. And it's hard to do it. It's hard to do it, but it's also, as they always say, healthy. It's healthy for those of us who kind of overspill our bodies to be reminded of boundaries, and to not just be bleeding out everywhere, but to remember that we also are little boxes that we carry our innards and our ether inspirations around in, and to cherish that we can define, this is who I am. I think there's some healthy ego invited in this moon that we can look at. Like, what form will my service take? That's like my body. How will my body enact service in the world? And just celebrating that, we're one unit.
Yeah, yeah, that's beautiful. It's beautiful. It must be a challenge to have a self-existing daughter born into two overtone people in the same house. It must have challenged both ways. That's
She
really,
was challenged.
yeah.
Yes. She's a survivor of overtone, dominance.
That's must be a interesting, yeah, interesting dynamic.
We could
So,
talk about the animals. Like, I think it would be nice for people who are tracking our recordings here. I mentioned that there's some animals associated with each of the 13 tones, and that's original Mayan teaching. We've really extrapolated a lot from the original Mayan animals, and that's thanks to Jose Arguelles, who was the, you know, driver of this fusion of ancient original Mayan teachings found in the hieroglyphs, as well as in the people that are still alive and Mayan. But he was threading that ancient history to all this language. There's nothing about self-existing, define form, measure, what form will my service take that is from a Mayan translation, like not literally. And also, let's circle back and talk about the self-existing, just that phrase. What does that even mean? But I won't just introduce the 13 animals because we could, from now on refer to them a little bit, but I just think it's helpful. The first magnetic one is bat, and the second is scorpion, and then the third is
Deer.
deer. And that's why I was trying to remember because when we talked about the electric moon and being of service, I mean, there is just something about deer that seems to really, I think they all match if you kind of cognate around it. But just to get to now, the self-existing one is owl. And I mean, I don't have a big speech about owls and form and defining and measuring, but that's the whole point is if you think about the animals, if you get exhausted with all this linguistic complexity, you can just go with the animals or you can launch from there, or you can talk to your children if you like introducing them to these concepts using animals and our inner children. Um, I just wanted to like thread that because there are all these pieces and ways, and some of us just respond viscerally and primally to parts that get a little bit buried in our modern natural time movement.
Yeah, yeah, it's beautiful. Really, when I think about the owl in relation to the concept of self-existing, so the owl is a very individualistic animal, and it has very clear vision in the darkness, and it has a very mystical aspect to it, but at the same time, it's very good in the body. It's very good in finding its place on the face of the earth. It's very awake, where places where most other creatures are not. And it's a very intelligent animal.
Yes, hyper. No, it also does that thing with its it's like got 360-degree movement somehow, like its whole head spirals around.
Yeah.
It's kind of awesome and yeah, total vision. Yeah, I mean, I hate to wax poetic about the animals because then I feel like I'm a bit like forcing modern ideas and concepts on. These are like primal animals that were, replaced all forms of entertainment. If you saw an owl at night, it was a spectacular interruption of an otherwise, I suppose, it feels hard to equate like my idea of an owl with what it would mean that far back in time. But I do think it could help someone to meditate
Yes.
on that.
Yes. And so when I kind of enter into this moon, so like any moon, because natural time as a tool is a tool of based on observation, based on firstly looking and experiencing reality through the senses without being active within it, and then choosing the action from clarity or an understanding of where am I coming from doing what I'm doing with the intention of being of service to the planet. So, doing my best that I leave the situation of my environment better than when I first showed up, which is a very simple way that I believe that also probably all indigenous cultures in many ways saw themselves as keepers of the land. If they take good care of their environment, so the earth gives them food and gives them safety and gives them guidance for times they don't know what to do. Um, and so when I enter this moon and I ask myself, so what form does my service want to take? I notice that I immediately kind of expect myself that by the end of this moon, I will know something better about myself and what I'm supposed to do and how I'm supposed to do it. And I assume that during this moon, I will go through some processes that are going to help me in this.
Mhm.
So it gives me a few kind of different angles. One is curiosity, like, wow, is there, so reality is going to help me right now on my own inner process to formulate what I want to give outwards. So maybe it doesn't mean it's all on my shoulders to find the way. And also, it puts a bit of pressure because it's like, man, now I need to take all this energy and kind of stick it into some boxes so I can work with these boxes and turn it into a pyramid later further on in the journey, something that vessels, not just contains.
Let's see. I think so. I want us to be able to talk for anyone watching about the word phrase self-existing, like that pairing of words, because you just mentioned self and identifications around self for this time, and the word self-existing or that pairing of words. Like I didn't do the deep dive. I want to be a little bit honest about my history. I was a single mother, desperate for a post-divorce, desperate for some like family religion, some kind of spiritual thing to share with my children. And my older daughter was the one who liked the Mayan calendar. And so I was like, okay, I'm all in and we'll do this. And I was very self-taught. There was no internet then, not at least in my life. There weren't really books, and I didn't care to go and follow Jose Arguelles around. He was like a kind of had a traveling band of gypsies and kind of a countercultural force that was very intimate if you could meet up with it. And I didn't have the any possibility of that. So I ended up being very self-taught, and I would never have read where did self-existing come from. All I know is that it was a Buddhist term, like people could find it in that format, in that philosophy, and that he chose these phrases, words for all the tones and tribes, um, from his vast experience, multifaceted. He understood all the world's spiritualities. He was just that kind of scholar. So he chose this sort of very Buddhist term for this phase. And I think that will help. Like it will help to just feel like it's kind of a Buddhist phase. And Buddhism has so much specificity of how to greet enlightenment, how to invite it. It is very form driven, but it offers the same promise of connectivity. And so the self-existing, that sounds, I'm an only child, so it's sort of like the only child expression within the 13 moons, within the 13 tones. Like it's a moment where you should examine who you are individually. That is part of your form of service, is to check in with self. So you're thinking about serving others, but how can you best do that? Like actively, as you said, in a way that people can notice and witness. It's not just vague. And so, yeah, it's a pretty strong moment to be autonomous in a certain way. If you're pulled away from the culture or even your intimate relationships right now, because you want to find out what am I about? I think that's just an instinctual response to the moon. And I also, it's kind of prejudice against the northern hemisphere because I'm in America. And so I experience this as autumn in a very specific way where we're going into darkness, and the southern hemisphere is having the opposite, a form of spring. But you can notice in your life history that self-existing moon is always this time in October into November. It's always that. This calendar doesn't change. It always starts July 26th. So you can look back at your life and the feeling you're having right now that's connected to light and temperature and the mood of society is the self-existing mood or moment. And there is that sort of preparedness for winter, real clear identification that we are subject to the laws of nature, which again is a form of containment and also survival. Like, where do I fit within that? I want to make sure my box, my body is safe or prepared for the loss of light.
Yes. Yes. I like that. I like that perspective. And you reminded me now listening to you that I noticed that in self-existing times, I have a lot of realizations about myself. Like, why am I existing? What is my existence for? But in a very practical level. Like, I kind of, it's this time of like, yes, so this is what's good for me.
Mhm.
And yes, this is the kind of relationship I need right now. And yes, this is the best environment for my daughter. It's like all kinds of these very simple, concrete understandings that there's, on the one hand, there's a sense of ease when they come because it's like, yes, I understand, I get it. Like it's not a blur, it's not a movement, it's a clear idea. But at the same time, it's very concrete. It sets thing as solid. It's like once I get to this level of understanding, it's not moving anymore like a box. So like the energy is framed within a box, and now I'm going to work with this box. I'm not going to work with just the free range of the energy that's available to me. And I personally, I'm sure like you as well, I've had to evolve into loving this because as a youngster, like kids, it's obvious, it's known that kids don't like sitting in square classrooms with square tables looking at a square board. They like to run around, they like to be flexible, and they like to change their mood from moment to moment and let their body move with the change of their mood. But it's like we teach them from a young age that in order to exist within society, you need to square yourself into a definition. So now you're a student in this grade and you're learning this subject and you're learning it for this amount of time. And in the end, you have a test and you put the definitions and the rules into the piece of paper. Or maybe by now they test children on in computers, maybe someone will listen to this one day and paper will be like, what, you used to use paper? Why would you use paper and cut down trees for writing
Yeah,
down things and
it's good.
maintaining ideas? That's a weird thought, but so there's
Well,
something.
yeah.
I'll finish the phrase and then take it. So on, there's something very kind of demanding in going into a self-existing phase because it's also acknowledging your limitations.
Yeah.
And so it's again taking spirituality or spiritual energy and putting it into material form. And I think one of the main things that I felt that this wisdom is serving me going out of a phase of being like the wind and moving around and being going where my heart tells me to be to a more, I choose one place and I stay there and I deal with the reality that I face staying in this one place. And obviously, as we grow up, we learn to love it because safety and stability and security are things that we need in order to develop in a healthy way, and we want to give them to our children. But at the same time, it's kind of like shutting us into limitation mode. It's like now myself is existing within these constructs, and I have to accept it that only through this I will be able to transcend once again at some further point down the line.
Yeah, for sure. Because when we have the 28-day moons, we stop within each of the tones for such a while. Um, but usually we're paying attention to how we have a self-existing day, and then it's followed by an overtone day. And the moons, if we go deep, these are, I feel like if you were listening to us, you could just be kind of overwhelmed by how specific we're being about the box and the square and how you have boundaries and, containment. And again, like if we all only could live with the human capacity to invent specifics and form and measure as we are so skilled at, I think we'd be suicidal. And some of us are basically like, if we can't escape the way the human mind reacts to its existence without spiritual input, meaning the greater, vaster consciousness, we feel like it's not worth living. So this moment is just the one stop, the phase that we pass through that is in itself in service to further growth that's going to be expansive and multidimensional and connect us to all things, creatures, universes. Like it's going there. It is, I mean, again, I can liken it to when people do plant spirit medicine journeys. There's, if it's a good one, there is a lot of preparation for the ceremony, and then you go for it. And this is that moment of preparation. And I also loved what you said. It's like you could call it like the selfish tone or the selfish moon, and it wouldn't be wrong. But that's like a pejorative or a demeaning way of saying people have to focus on themselves. But a healthy society means that people are doing things to focus on themselves so that they bring the best of themselves or the clearest form of themselves
Exactly.
outward. So this is
Yeah.
just a process, a preparatory process. I do kind of structure that the first four moons, we'll say, or tones are preparatory and kind of like excavation of into the unconscious things that we haven't brought to light that are wanting to be brought to light volcanically. And we're down here doing the dirty work of of encouraging that to happen. And when we get to overtone, it's taken out of our hands. We're still kind of digging the hole, but then whatever we uncover, like the release of pressure that we, through our digging, something explodes out from deep beneath the surface of the earth. That's the overtone moment. And then we're riding the wave. Like we're sort of in the wave's emergence and we are hand to hand with it right now. And then we just get to ride. So if it feels like work, what we're describing, or the containment feels like ick, I want more freedom than that. It's really coming. And some people will find the self-existing moon is really, really calming and centering because we're like children who haven't been parented well and we do want boundaries. And then we'll miss this when it's overtone because it's very much like a popcorn. It's going to blast off and we'll be like, oh man, I long for when I was more contained. And I think that's sort of the bittersweet beauty is each of these moons, the tones, as well as the tribes, have shadow and light. That's how I teach. It's like, well, these are the sort of the things that feel easy to us, and these are the things that feel challenging. So I think you're getting a full picture that some things feel easy because of the self-existing moon's form-oriented presence, and some things feel hard, etc.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they pass. It's all so cyclical that it will pass.
And also, I like when you put it this way that if we take it to the four dots that create the square, so it's like saying that all polarities are contained within a structure that keeps them secure in their place. And it's a kind of a way of looking at life, especially in these very fast changing times that many people are very afraid, including myself often. Not very, I think, but I'm afraid, with the reality I'm facing and the knowing of the self-existing tone, the self-existing concept as a spiritual concept and a practical physical concept. It gives me the ability to rest kind of upon knowing that eventually I'll hit some kind of a limit within myself. Like I'll meet something that will naturally bounce me back. And it enables me to explore the polarities in a much more secure way, maybe confident, secure, safe way, because I know that there is always a structure to things. Even when things look like they're coming apart, there's a structure to the process of coming apart.
Mm.
And it's not just like even when you pour water into the sink and then it goes into the sewage, unfortunately, in many cases when I was living an ecological life, so my water was watering my plants and growing trees and food for me. But for most of us in our modern homes, it's going down the drain and then flowing on. So even when the water eventually finishes its journey and reunites with the whole body of water, which is the ocean, it's contained within some kind of a container. Even
Right.
the ocean is contained, so the ocean is the vast majority of this planet, and it's moving all the time, and it has no moment that it stops moving. In any moment, the water never stops moving in any form you put it. Even when it's fumes, it's moving and you don't see it. So the same thing with the self-existing tone. It kind of gives me this knowing that eventually, as if we take it back to the beginning of the conversation, as a human with language, I can catch every single process that I'm processing within me in some kind of a form of definition of some kind of a form. And I think that it comes to me to say that for spiritual people, but everybody is spiritual in some form, especially in these times when we're losing grip on the way we used to see reality because of the systems that were working for us that are not working so well anymore. Um, this assurance that we can rely on our human form to contain every single part of our processes, even when we feel like we're detached or disconnected, even that's contained in a container, that eventually we will come back to the simple existing form of things, and life will continue from that point. So it's like we meet the self-existing tone every 13 days, and like we'll meet the self-existing moon every 13 months, and like we'll meet the self-existing year every 13 years. And it's, for me, it just brings a lot of it it brings a lot of peace and acceptance to the existence of things, of life as it is.
I feel like that is a very strongly, and I don't mean this negatively, masculine, like sort of summation. Like when you're talking about your experience, I relate to it and I understand it conceptually. And all I want to add is, and it couldn't just be like my female body. We're talking about masculine and feminine aspects of self, which we all hold. But what comes up for me is that we're a few days into it when we record, and I'm like so much less codependent. I don't know if I veer towards codependence strongly anymore, but I'm actually just, I feel the difference. Like, oh, I am not preoccupied with other people's needs. I feel like I have really good boundaries. Like, they're almost not even spoken. It's just like, oh, I'm sure they'll figure that out. Like, I'm not drawn in all directions with my empathy, and the world is full of people in need. I also have needs right now, and I notice that I feel confident, more confident because of this moon, that I can take care of my needs. Whether they're like problems that need to be solved, or it's maybe a more emotional, on an emotional level, like it's not just a functional problem to solve, but like an internal working to solve. I feel more confident that I can do that without needing something from someone else. And so again, it's just a phase within the 13, but I do like that clarity. Like what's mine is mine, it's what's yours is yours. That sounds selfish, right? We don't want a whole culture endlessly using that attitude, but it feels really nice and relieving to have, yeah, the clarity around that right now.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And kind of where we're approaching the end of this episode conversation, wonder what kind of tip you can give for people listening to us on how to approach the processes of the self-existing moon, how they can maybe best mm, yeah, gain the benefits of doing this process, going through this process. Or yeah, I think you know what I mean. Any advice?
Well, I do. I mean, it's just interesting because we're following three really sizably demanding moons, demanding in the sense that beginning the wave spells, I think, is the dirty work of like, oh my God, I didn't even know this was on my radar, and here it's been delivered to me, and I have to sort it out, and I am overwhelmed. Like that's sort of how I perceive the beginning of many wave spells. many years. And so my advice is sort of to be grateful in a way that I think you're innately drawn. One is innately drawn to detail and being just a regular human trying to deal with their life right now, and to just not feel like you've lost the thread. Like, oh my God, I was so spiritual and I had such clarity about what my purpose was, and I was overcoming my challenge. And now I'm just like an automaton, making sure I've settled my bank accounts or what have you, like things that aren't as awesome. And that might not be literally your experience, but just like if it feels more mundane or tactical moving through your life rather than inspirational, just you're right in the groove. That's what's going on right now. We're securing ourselves because the rocket ship is going to blast off. We're putting our seatbelts on for something that gets otherworldly really quickly and is powerful and amazing. This is also amazing. Again, it just weaves much more into the dull part of being human, but also the skill set we have as humans. So it's not as noticeable and remarkable, but just both enjoy that and observe it, and then take the actions that are in front of you. That's like truly how I try to live. I mean, I'm a very, like, I grew up in the hippie movement and it was overwhelming to me who I am. And so I really do reorient my life to to-do lists and, having boundaries around my own life experience so that I'm getting things done within the box of human survival. So I always advocate for people to be checking to make sure they're taking care of themselves that way. That would be the only awakening I would invite right now, is to just see how secure you are, in your tasks,
Mm.
less so in your relationships. Again, this is a time, building the base of the pyramid is just a very functional process. It's not a discussion about where things should go. That already came through, that was divinely ordered. Now we're moving big blocks of stone, at the base of something. So just let yourself be that functional.
Nice. I like that. I take this advice. I take this advice.
I love
You,
it. I'm just so into it. As we discuss it, it's just ballooning for me how
mhm.
powerful that is, and relieving. A lot of us were parented chaotically. I'm sure there are people listening who were overly shepherded by their parents and felt boxed in, and that's why you're blasting off with Mayan occult wisdom. But, wherever you are, I just think there is something soothing and primal about being in your nest or knowing where you belong. And that is the foundation of what we're in right now, is being given that feeling of safety and clarity. So that's great. I'm excited.
Yeah, me too. Me too. I'm really excited. It's bringing me, I think also both of us being overtones, so we're very used to the experiences of breaking out of the barriers and
Right.
expanding the picture and empowering what exists and being this kind of for me it's often felt like being a rebel, but I'm not a rebel at all in my character. I'm actually very compatible and like accepting, but felt like my role was always to see the bigger picture and reflect it and live it. And also to mention that from the four, when we break through the five, it's like taking the square and starting to direct it more towards a pyramid, something that evolves the square into something new. So this is bringing me suddenly from all our conversation, I'm like, whew, this is actually really good for me right now. I really need to solidify some things that are still kind of moving in the form of idea or vision or energy in my life, and I'm really looking forward to kind of making order of the squares of the stones. So this base will be a good one for me to break through to where I'm already knowing that I'm directing my energy. And I think this is also something worth to mention, that in this processing of grounding the foundation of the self-existing moon, we already contain within us the breakthrough that's going to happen thanks to us laying down this solid foundation. So it's kind of like, for me at least, it's giving me more motivation to do this grounding earthwork, physical, kind of more physical processes in the physical world, because I know already where I'm directing my breakthrough to happen. So it's kind of like giving me good motivation for this. So I feel like in this conversation, we were really took it nicely from the electric tone, where we were both quite happy to be when we met it, and moving into this more structural moon. And I feel like we've really been able to set a nice movement, like to define the movement with in which we're going to move during this moon. So so I thank you again so much for giving me your presence and your time and your wisdom, giving us, sharing with us. And I'm really excited for the overtone moon that will come, our next meeting, both of ours moons. So
Oh yeah, it'll be off the
our
rails, all this
our
over.
home base. We'll be meeting at our home base for the first time. It's really going to be fun.
It's true. I didn't, we have a lot of like polarities we offer, but that won't be one of them.
No,
This whole teaching series is really grounded in overtone people and vibration, that's for sure.
yeah. So till then, I can really wish you a very stabilizing month and moon, and I'm looking forward to seeing you again really soon.
Right. And to everyone watching, I always know that whatever I'm saying is for you because there's no time and no space, and my intention and my psychic ability is to speak to you, even though this was recorded well before you would have heard it. It's for you, and I'm so glad you're here. And thank you, Ellen, for being my partner in this. It's so fun to do it together.
It is, yes. So to our listeners and our audience, I remind that you can follow Lisa on her podcast Natural Time on Spotify, and you can find me on my YouTube channel, also Alone More Natural Time, and we will be in touch very soon.
Think that I should mention that I have a website, Resonant Truth, and Resonant Truth is my Instagram handle. And I do readings because maybe I forget that while I also teach and offer things publicly, I am a clairvoyant and I do an interpolation of intuitive and astrology readings. And it's all of this force, the overtone, intensity directed at your life so that you can have an explosive awareness of your own astrology. So I should mention that. I
Amazing.
forget that I
That
do
was an
that.
amazing definition of what you do. And I'll take your inspiration on it and say as well, I too offer readings from my very empowering perspective, very white mirror, very order, making order in the life, bringing order to life, and from an empowered place, a place of expansion. So we're both to your service. Uh, Happy to do what we do.
Yeah, it's like if you wish you could be seen directly and you want to be, we both can help you be the star of your show in terms of your Mayan astrology.
Beautiful.